John, for being here with us today. We have made you co-host, so you'll be able to share your screen at this point. So welcome.
Thank you. We're super happy to be here. I will put some information in the chat of how to get a hold of us as well. And bear with me, and I am going to share my screen here. And we'll get going. Okay, so first off, we are talking about OSHA. It is a 4-letter word, but it's a good 4-letter word. And one of the things that I really appreciate about OSHA is the fact that the whole purpose of it was to help us go home to our loved ones the way that we came to work or better. And I think that's something that we all would hope for ourselves as well as our coworkers. Back before 1970, we did not have OSHA, and there was no system laid out to help protect workers. And as a result, we were losing over 14,000 people a year due to workplace fatalities. And people said, that's enough, and we need to make things safer. We need to send people home. And so they worked as a response of just people being upset and disappointed of how we were treating workers. So since OSHA began, we have decreased the fatalities in the workforce by 60%. Unfortunately, today we're still losing about 12 individuals a day in workplace-related fatalities. And as a point of interest, and I'm not sure if I can see this, but if anyone have any idea how many fatalities we had in Arizona due to workplace incidences? The latest data that we have is from 2019. Anyone have any idea how many fatalities we had in 2019? I wish it was one, Chad. I wish it was one. That's our goal for life. We actually had 94 fatalities in 2019. So when you start breaking that down into numbers, it's 7 people a month. You know, we have a lot of companies that we work with that are smaller and have 7 employees. And so, you know, that's a huge impact to any job, but also to those companies, those coworkers and all of those folks, and the impact that is, not to mention just the impact that it has on families. So we are hoping we can get it down to 1, and that really is the goal of OSHA. And I'm going to set that aside and talk a little bit about the OSHA education centers and how we fit in with OSHA. So we don't do anything with compliance. We're not the ones that are out investigating your sites. We are, as was mentioned earlier, so we are in a partnership between ASU and the Department of Labor. And with that, OSHA realized after they had started doing some training and helping get some education out there that they couldn't do it all. So they developed this cooperation program between universities and the Department of Labor. And there's 26 of us across the United States. And we are basically the training arm of OSHA. So we help to get that information out and to teach folks about OSHA and about the standards and how we can get people to go home safe. OSHA does set our learning objectives. They set the required hours that we have. And then each of us individually at our different universities and colleges are independently operated and then oversee the programs that OSHA has for us. Some of the things that we do here at the education, so we do teach the OSHA curriculum. Again, it's laid out very specifically so that no matter where you're getting your training, that it is all fitting within those guidelines that come from the OSHA standards. Many of you may be familiar with the OSHA 10 and 30-hour programs. You can see a sample of the 10-hour safety card that is there on the bottom right of your screen. So we do train those trainers that are out teaching the 10 and 30-hour programs and make sure that once they're trained that they're following the rules, and we're also processing the cards that they're issuing. Just a couple of things of, you know, how the Education Center can help you and be a resource for you. Obviously, training is a big part of what we do every day. As I mentioned, overseeing the outreach trainers and making sure that the cards that are getting out there are doing the right things and that we're keeping the integrity of that program. Possibly we can help reduce fines when there are citations available or out there. That is something that can be used to do some training instead of paying full fines. We also are a great resource of information, and a lot of our classes will give you the opportunity to interact with a lot of other safety professionals. And I've been really impressed in each of our classes, just the networking that happens and the interactions that have, and the post-class stories of people reaching out to each other and helping with different situations, or, hey, remember you talking about this in class, and could you help me, I'm having something similar. And so folks that are out there in the safety profession are definitely out there to help each other and to make this goal be realize that we can get those fatalities down to 1 or none. I know someone asked about Spanish. So there is Spanish training out there. We are working on getting more availability of that here at our Ed Center. And so if that's something you're interested in, I did put my chat or my contact information in the chat. Feel free to reach out to us, and happy to have a conversation with you regarding that. It kind of depends on what specific things you're looking for. Moving on, one of the other things that, of course, there's lots of opportunities for safety as a career path. A lot of folks that are looking to retire from the workforce, but not ready to necessarily hang up their work belts altogether. We have a lot of folks that are doing safety as kind of a second career or as a part-time type thing with their experience in the construction industry, and being able to review jobs that are coming up, evaluate safety needs. They potentially could move into training workers or developing training, helping with accident investigations, and again, just helping people go home the way that they came. There's no degree required. There's lots of professional development out there. A lot of companies are willing to help train. And again, just this industry is so friendly and welcoming and all of that. As I mentioned, we're a good place for resources. There are a lot of resources online. For example, all of the standards that OSHA utilizes are online at this site. And this presentation will be available, I'm assuming, through the Registrar of Contractors. And we can get that out to you. I'm trying to watch the chat and see if I'm answering these questions. But so that is out there. And some of the other things, just because, everyone likes things that are easy and at your fingers. I thought today we could go over a couple of resources that are out there and easily available, and that's apps. So there are lots and lots and lots of resources out there, and these are just a very small few of them. Most of the ones that are on here are free, but there are some that do have a fee to them. Excuse me. I'm going to start here in the middle section. You'll notice there's a lot of them that have to relate with NIOSH, which is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, for any of you that are not familiar with that acronym. But they do have a lot of things that relate to sounds, ladders, overall chemical hazard data, weather with their heat exposure. And so really, most of these apps are both Apple and Android friendly, so you can utilize those on either of those platforms. But the ladder safety is pretty unique in that you can help you determine the correct angle for your ladders if you're using ladders. So again, just some great resources out there. And sometimes we want people off their phones, but sometimes there's some good things that are out there that we can utilize the technology for. So just something for you to have as a reference. A couple of other ones that are out there regarding trench safety, first aid, doing safety reports, and additional things. Something else that I would like to touch base on. So we do a collaborative activities and events, and we have one of those coming up in March. We are coordinating with all of the outreach centers that are here in Region 9, and I thought I had a slide in here, but I guess I took it out or didn't get it put in. But OSHA has broken up the United States into regions, and we happen to fall into Region 9, which includes California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and Guam. And so we work together with the region to put together different events like this one that you see on the screen. This is a Monday event where we have updates from all of the state plans, and will help to just give you an update of what's going on in the specific areas. But I think probably most important, because it has to do with free training, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, each of the 4 ed centers that are here in Region 9, there's myself here in Arizona, and then there are 3 in California. We are doing free classes. So you can take 1 free class a day. There's 12 classes to choose from. And those are all listed there on your screen. And the registration will open on Monday. If that's something you're interested in, I would tell you jump on that on Monday, because it does fill up quickly. But it is a great opportunity to get into looking at different things for topics and getting some of that safety training. So definitely something to for you to consider. And I'm going to back up a minute, because it seems like I failed to get a couple slides in. I look at this so much that sometimes I feel like I might miss some things. And one of the things that I want to back up a little bit and explain, as is mentioned on this flyer, that we have the state plans. So Arizona is in a unique situation in that we are not, so OSHA oversees everything at the federal level, but in Arizona, California, and Nevada, we all are overseen by state plans. And so basically, as a state, the state of Arizona said we can manage our safety plans and the safety in our state as good or better than what the federal government can do. And so we have what's called ADOSH, which is the Arizona Division of Occupational Safety and Health. And so those are the ones that are out there investigating sites, that if there's any complaints or any fatalities, they're the ones that are doing those investigations. And so we are very lucky that we have them and we can work with them, and they understand things that are happening here in Arizona and can help manage those things and make sure that the things that are the rules and the guidelines and the standards are being implemented as best as we can here in Arizona. So again, just to help clarify a few of those things, and I apologize for not including the slide about that. All right, so OSHA does have some national campaigns to focus on some key areas. One of those, in construction, we have 4 topics that continually seem to be most frequently cited and tend to have the most fatalities associated with those. One of those focused 4 is falls. And so OSHA has come out with an annual stand down each May. For this year, it will be May 2nd through the 6th, where we will be focusing on how we can better protect ourselves and our workers from falls. And we are going to talk a little bit more. That's where John comes in. He's our subject matter expert on some of these topics. And so he will give us a few more details on falls. Another campaign, and we are very familiar with this here in Arizona, is the heat illness prevention. And OSHA has developed a campaign of water, rest, shade to help make sure that we are keeping workers safe when the temperatures rise. They really focus on this during the warmer months, which for us is starting now. Unfortunately, I was hoping we could push that into March, but it seems like we're hitting some of those higher temperatures now. This is something, it's not an emerging issue, it's just something that people are paying more attention to now. And we will, again, we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment. One of the other things that is now becoming a priority because of the incidences and fatalities that we're seeing with it is the excavations. And so again, you know, what's any campaign without a good slogan? So slope it, shore it, shield it. Basically one of those methods to prevent and to protect our employees that are down in those trenches and those excavations and that. So with that, John, I'm going to take a pause and turn it over to you to share some additional information with these three topics.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm going to go back to the falls. So let me share my screen with you guys now. Hope everybody, you guys can all see that, right? So I work with Lisa. I'm one of the instructors at ASU at the OSHA Education Center at ASU. And so my background's been in construction, like my big, long biography was mentioned in the beginning. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were going to read it. So I'm going to shorten it up a little bit for you. But when we talk about safety, we're talking about construction safety. Falls are the #1 cause of fatalities and one of the major causes of injuries in the workplace. Even in the years where we saw a lot of the workplace, the work function slow down, during the COVID year in 2020, we still see those years coming out, the early statistics showing that falls were still #1 for injuries and fatalities. So talk a little bit about falls, because there's a lot of myths behind falls and things that I see on job sites that are reoccurring. I think most often is due to maybe the lack of training or maybe the lack of appropriate PPE. We have a specific area where when we're talking about falls, OSHA gives us a very easy to follow guide on how we're to protect employees in falls. And the hierarchy of fall protection is first a guardrail system, then a safety net, and then PPE. So I know that there was a question in the chat about parapet walls, and I'll have an opportunity to answer that in the Q&A. But we really have to just follow this really simple process when we're looking at fall protection. It starts with a guardrail. If we cannot do a guardrail because of the infeasibility of that, and OSHA particularly uses that term infeasibility in the fall protection standard, then we have to go to the other protections. And a lot of times we see on a job site, the first thing, that we're driving into the job site, first thing we see, you got to have your PPE, you got to have your hard hat, your safety glasses. And I think that we've developed this culture in construction where we automatically go to that personal protection, and there's other ways that we can reduce risk, right? Once we've selected what type of protection we're going to use, then we have to apply it. And then we have to make sure that our employees understand how those protections are there to protect them, which also involves training. So things like Focus 4, when we talk about Focus 4, falls and electricity caught between struck by, falls is always #1. And it's been that way for almost a decade. There hasn't been another type of injury or fatality that's overtaken it. So falls are very serious. When we look at OSHA and OSHA inspections, this is something that is emphasized that a compliance officer will look at when we're going to a construction site where we have elevated work. Now, we have to keep in mind that there's a lot of different industries related around fall protection. It's not just construction, of houses, or construction in commercial operations or industrial. Scaffolding has its own fall protection requirement. Steel erection has its own fall protection requirement, different heights. And so when we look at training for fall protection, those heights really matter. One of the things that I see when I go on a job site is the perception that the worker has some type of protection because they're in a harness and connected to some type of fall restraint or fall arresting device. And if we do a simple calculation and we understand how those devices elongate, we can see a lot of people in danger even wearing the PPE, that they can fall from a lower level and hit the ground. Just because you're above 6 feet doesn't mean you can't hit the ground while wearing fall protection. So the perception of fall protection is one of those things that I like to emphasize when I do my training, is that, yeah, they may have a harness on, they may have a lanyard connected, it looks good, but if we do a simple calculation and elongation of the equipment connected back to the anchor, it might be that they're going to fall and hit the ground. And so when I train, that's one of the things that I really like to emphasize, is that the calculation of the actual fall protection needs to be included in the hazard awareness of that, so that we don't have these false sense of security, for one, from the safety standpoint, and also two, from the worker standpoint, feeling like they're protected. And so they really have to understand that. And then fall protection really goes into a lot of detail. We spend on our OTI fall protection course, we spend 3 days talking about fall protection just in construction. And so there is a lot of detail there. There is a lot of planning. It does tie back into a lot of different areas. We call those vertical standards and horizontal standards when we're talking about general industry and construction. And I think for falls, it is important, if we have a national stand down May 2nd to 6th, that we really do take the time and talk about elevated workers. An elevated worker is anybody who works in a dangerous area of 0 feet above dangerous equipment, 4 feet in general industry, 6 feet in construction, 10 feet on scaffolds, and then 25 feet in bridge work and 15 to 30 feet in steel erection work. So we have to really look at how we're applying that to our workspace, our jobs, dealing with falls. So I hope you guys have some questions, and I'll be happy to answer those. There's a lot more here than I have. I can talk for 3 days on falls, literally. Speaking of heat-related illness and prevention, OSHA in November has put out a request for rulemaking. And so the request for rulemaking to change the construction standard for heat illness prevention. I think we've, here in Arizona, if you've worked here in the desert, for a while, you understand we have a pretty good grasp on how we are go about the seasons and the season change and acclimation. Again, the key emphasis here is that our workers are well hydrated. They're prepared and they're physically ready to go out and do that type of work. I like to talk about, the things that deter away from hydration: caffeine intake, not enough water the night before, or even hydrating over the weekend to be prepared for the week. But also from the employer standpoint is that as an employer, you are required to provide water, potable water on site for these employees, a place for them to rest, a place for them to have some shade. And what that looks like is going to be very different depending on your job site or where you're working. It can be as simple as retreating back to a vehicle that has air conditioning, or setting up a pop-up tent and giving some chairs for people to sit and rest for during their breaks. It's not something that we have to really look into going overboard and providing a lot of the things that you might see, the working athlete and the power aids and things like that on site. It's very simple. Hydrate, shade, and rest will get you through that. The other things that we have issues with is not just in the heat, in the summer heat months, but also in the wintertime. As I mentioned in my bio, I did spend 5 years on Sunrise Mountain as ski patrol, and we see a lot of people, being injured because of heat-related illness for overlayering, putting too much clothes on and then not having that breathable layer that they're able to sweat it out. Our body allows us to cool down if we let it. And so if we overlayer in the cold, if we're up, in the snow, working on the mountain or anything like that, the overlayering can actually cause the same heat-related illnesses as we do working in the sun. So we want to make sure that we're not just looking at the summertime as an area where we're working with heat-related illness, but also in our wintertime in the colder areas of the state. Trench and excavation. We've recently had a number of fatalities locally here. We had 2 last year, and I believe it was last year. I might be getting my 2021 and 2020 mixed up. Over in Glendale, we had a multiple fatality of trench collapse of 12 feet. This is something where we see about 100 fatalities a year nationwide. And so what OSHA has done is they've created what's called the National Emphasis Program for Trench and Excavation Safety. And so the program is marketed, and it's marketed because we're seeing so many injuries as well as fatalities. And so that's why you see the sticker: slope it, shore it, shield it. When we're thinking about trench and excavation, this also links to fall protection. We see a lot of injuries due to falls because working around excavations, we have a fall hazard. So a couple of key areas I want to talk about here is the regulations are very specific when to protect the excavation. One, a trench is an excavation, and an excavation is an excavation. So when we look at those definitions, they're very specific in OSHA and how we go about identifying what that excavation looks like. A trench cannot be wider than 15 feet at the bottom. It's typically deeper than it is wide. An excavation is any man-made cut in the earth. And so it's very specific on the protection of any excavation. Deeper than 4 feet, we need access and egress. And then deeper than 5 feet, it requires a protective system. One of the areas that I like to talk more about in my classes is soil mechanics. Again, another myth that we have here in Arizona is that when we do an excavation, we hear this all the time, everything is type C soil. Maybe everything is type C soil if we go through that process. One of the things that OSHA does is when they come to a site for a trench and excavation, is they look for that competent person. And that competent person is deemed competent by demonstration. So when we're looking at OSHA's interaction with our workers, when they come to a site, they're actually going to require that competent person to demonstrate how they came about this with the soil mechanics in their visual and manual testing to determine the soil classification. Now, this isn't very hard. There's a little bit of physics behind it, but understanding soil mechanics is very important if you have competent persons that are doing excavations on your site, and if you have had OSHA come in the past, or you're worried about a compliance officer showing up because of the emphasis program, then that part of the training is very critical, because that is a key to getting your excavation within compliance, if that's what you're worried about. We should also be worried about cave-ins no matter what depth. Once we've been able to identify what that soil mechanic is, the particle size, the cohesiveness, how much friction is involved, how much saturation is in the soil. All those things are key to understanding how soil mechanics create what we call unconfined compressive strength. And that unconfined compressive strength is the literal strength of the sidewall in compression and friction, including water saturation, to stay in the position that it's in when we cut it. So when we see things like a trench excavation, a sidewall collapse, or when we see some type of failure in an excavation, it's typically due to that unconfined compressive strength. That's the weight of the soil on itself, not including a backhoe on top of the toe edge of the wall, or any other surcharge load from the spile, the spoil pile. Sorry, those are also affecting what that sidewall is doing. But it's very important that we understand soil mechanics, and that's emphasized in your training for your employees. I think once we do a comprehensive understanding of how we look at the soil mechanics, how we classify it, how we do a visual inspection and a manual inspection, and it's pretty easy from there. We can look at easy protections. There's only 4 protective systems in excavation safety, right? Sloping, shoring, shielding, and benching. And so those are the areas, and I think we have some photos. So here's some obvious issues that we have, right? We're looking at this job site. It's hot. They're looking for shade. The obvious shade is right underneath the plate, except for there's, a excavator right on top of the plate. Now, the problem might not be the plate. The problem is going to be the surcharge load that's being transmitted to the sidewall. And that sidewall can collapse at any minute without warning. This goes back to fall protection, right? How did he get up there? He's a good box jumper at the gym. So he's able to get up on 3 5-gallon buckets. Somebody took the ladder from him and then left him on these buckets. One of the other areas of fall protection I'd like to mention is that when we talk about ladders, we tend to integrate ladders with fall protection. Falls from ladders are in the thousands in the United States. But ladder safety is a completely different standard than fall protection. And we tend to integrate those. And we always hear, well, if you're working off of a ladder at 6 feet, you have to be protected. And that's not the case. Ladder safety is a completely different subject matter. Here we have somebody in an excavation. And though you might say he's less than 4 feet from the edge, he's inside the excavation on the bench, or what looks like to be a bench. And you see that whole run of excavation there doesn't have any type of protection in it. Now, granted, there's not people inside of the excavation working. I can't see that from the picture. There may be somebody at the bottom of that ladder that the backhoe is holding up. I can't tell you. I see this a number of times every summer. What happens if the hydraulics fail? You have a multi-fatality. You have 4 people that are going to die because it was hot outside. Again, this might go back to culture and how the employer provides shade or they don't provide shade in the workplace. What we want to do is eliminate this type of activity. And so it would be easy. A pop-up tent is very inexpensive in comparison to the risk involved. The risk benefit involved in this is very low. There's no benefit if something fails. Genius. This is ingenuity at its finest. I don't have a lift that's going to get me all the way up there. So what can I use to get me all the way up there? And so it's a logical process for humans to think, I got to get the job done. So what am I going to use to get the job done? And then you have a picture show up on an OSHA slide like this. On top of that, the gentleman's at the parapet wall, doing some roofing work, hanging over the edge without any type of protection. So we see this a lot on the Instagrams and LinkedIn's and things like that. And these actually happen. I've taken my fair share of pictures just like this. It's, again, the lack of training. We look at this as professionals, we may say, oh, that's common sense, don't do that. But people don't have common sense unless they've been trained to know what that common sense is. And so I don't like that term in a sense that, oh, that's common sense. Well, we don't know that. They haven't been trained in lift safety. They haven't been trained in forklift safety, then that's not common sense. And so we have to look at that from a perspective of risk. How much risk are you allowing in your workplace? What's the acceptable level of risk? And then can we protect and reduce that risk in each job site? Risk is one of those things where we're looking at the same subject could be a different risk factor on a different job site. And so we cannot approach everything as kind of a blanket when in safety. We have to look at everything at an individual level, at the time that it's occurring, and on different job sites. And so I think when we talk about safety culture and we talk about how safety is related to individuals and training, we look at risk factors and what's the risk benefit factor for framing a house, right? Can I do the job and allow some risk? Yes. Can I reduce that risk? Of course. And a lot of times what it comes down to is money and time. And we want to get away from that. Money and time should not be a factor when we're talking about human lives and the risk of people, right? It benefits companies and benefits employers to make sure that if that employee is healthy and that employee is productive, that they'll have longevity with that organization. And so from that standpoint, it's taking more of a leadership role. They might as well just keep burying them. At some point, the weight of all of that rock may collapse the sidewall. So if we look here, we have somebody who's inside of an excavation deeper than 5 feet, no protective system. And this is, again, this is just not acceptable. In our day and time when we have so much technology and so much money that we put into training and workforce development, this should never happen. We should never see this. How much do you trust your friends and coworkers? They look like they've got it handled. Again, we just go back to construction. We will do whatever it takes to get the job done. I've spent my whole life in construction since I was a teenager. And so this is the thought process behind this is we have to get it done. So let's figure out a way. And that's just second nature in construction with construction workers. And we will figure out a way to do it. Unfortunately, it's higher risk than what's necessary. There are ladders and devices that we can set up that would do this exact same thing in a much safer fashion.
Thanks, John. So just a couple of things before we have Q&A. Just if any of you are wondering what could be the next step or how you could get some more of this training, Just a few of the classes that are good entry level is our OSHA 510, which goes over all of the CFR 1926 standards and helps you know what those rules and guidelines are. We have some specific classes on incident investigation, record keeping, what are those requirements, intro to safety and health management, understanding what you need to have set up for your company. And if you just are completely like, I don't know where to start, we also have a course that's OSHA for small business that really walks you through what those requirements are, specifically targeted for smaller businesses, but really starts at a ground level and builds up. All of our classes are 4 hours to 3.5 days, so nothing that's too extenuating. But you have our website on any of those things can be seen when you go to that website and look for our schedule and that. So with that,